Nico here at Film Formula. I've been wanting to do a video on this movie for quite some time now. Even though there are a bunch of reviews and analyses on it already, I thought I'd give my personal interpretation. Although there are lots of speculations on what this it creature is and how exactly it behaves, I'll be taking more of a generalized, thematic approach, partly because I found a few of the rules in this universe to be quite inconsistent. I mean, he says the it is always walking.
Wherever you are, it's somewhere, walking straight for you. But it is walking.
Yet here it is just chilling out. When you shoot it, it dies for a second, then gets up like it's no big deal. But then it bleeds enough to fill the whole pool, and suddenly it's smart enough to throw stuff? Well, that's a little annoying, but it just so happens that I like this film. Some of the scares were pretty original, and the soundtrack was a lot of fun. So I'm gonna kind of give the inconsistencies a pass because I don't think the it is an actual creature, or a demon, or a ghost. It really stands in as a sort of metaphor for some greater issue. Now, I know some of you hate movies like that, but I for one enjoy them. Admittedly, it seems to me like the filmmakers didn't think a whole lot about the rules of the it creature, and was rather making it up as they went along based on horror conventions and what looks cool at the moment. But I'm sort of okay with that because I see the film more thematically, and the themes are what's actually consistent throughout the film. There's obviously a theme of growing up. On Jay's date with Hugh says he'd like to trade places with a random young boy he sees because the boy has his whole life ahead of him.
I mean, how cool would that be to have your whole life ahead of you, you know?
The ahead of him is key because of course everyone has their life ahead of them. But how much?
Come on, it's not like you're old. You're 21.
As time goes on, we get closer to the end of our lives. The eventuality of the end of life is what I think the it represents, and its slow creeping pace represents the passage of time. So if the creature is death, then the longer we're alive, the closer we get to this creature, and the more there is to look back on. Now I know some of you are calling bullshit because you see the it creature's distance to the protagonist is fluctuating throughout the film, instead of getting increasingly closer. But remember that we don't really know when the end of our lives will be. Jay's perception of the creature is subjective, and her fear rises in proportion to how close the creature gets to her. But all of that is subjective. There's a whole theory on how the subconscious brain, where fear resides, is unable to tell time. Actually, there are a lot of anachronistic elements throughout the entire film that have got to be intentional. Anyway, this all ties in with why some people see the creature and some people don't. And yes, it does have to do with sex. After Jay has sex with Hugh for the first time, she reminisces about how she used to look forward to this moment.
It's funny. We used to daydream about being old enough to go on dates, and drive around with friends in their cars.
And now she's looking back to that time. Sex, I think, is this decisive moment in a person's life when they stop looking in front of them to the future and suddenly start looking behind them at the past. Now, this is about far more than just regretting a past sexual encounter, though that's also a part of some people's realities. Some people actually think the film is a metaphor for sexual assault, but I really don't buy that argument. The sex itself was consensual.
It was consensual?
Yeah.
It was just after the sex that things got weird. And the violence there was kind of alarming, but I really think that was all for show, and to increase tension, and to get that cool wheelchair shot. And no lie, when I watched the trailer, I totally thought this was gonna be about STDs.
Just sleep with someone as soon as you can. Just pass it along.
But now that I've actually watched the film, I think it's really about Jay losing her virginity, and thus unwittingly advancing to the next stage of life. Yep, the stage where you see dead people. I even got the sense that in that scene where she's standing in front of the bathroom mirror, that red ball was symbolic of her period. Okay, maybe I'm looking too much into it, but when I see white panties and a red dot, that's where my mind goes, goddammit. Alternatively, it could be symbolic of the bleeding that sometimes happens after having sex for the first time. I think Jay lost her virginity because of the way she was talking to her sister.
Have you... No. I know he wants to, but...
Although she tells Paul that she already had sex with Greg in high school, I don't really buy it because she knows Paul obviously likes her, and she had sex with Greg instead of him. And this is a convenient lie to get out of that awkward situation. I think Paul is also a virgin based on the way he acts in front of the girls.
I could stay over tonight if it would make you feel any better.
No.
So he's in the same stage of life as Jay before Jay had sex with Hugh. Paul is unafflicted by the it, but Hugh, being more experienced, is already afflicted. He's reminiscing about the past, he's tense, he's paranoid, and he's distrusting of people.
Do you guys see that girl right there?
Yeah?
Yes.
Which some would say comes with getting older and more jaded. So basically, death is coming for everyone, but before having sex, you don't really see it because you're so far away from it psychologically. The act of procreation reminds us of the cycle of life, and with it our own eventual demise. By the way, I know some of you are like, why is she focusing so much on having sex for the first time? We know the creature can be sexually transmitted to anyone. So what if Jay has sex with an adult who's already had sex a million times before? Well, then the creature would be transferred to them. But the film is really not concerned with that. Adults are hardly seen throughout the entire film, and they have like 2 lines of dialogue. Jay's father is never seen except in the form of the it, and Jay's mother's face is never in focus. Towards the end of the film, Paul drives by a couple of prostitutes, and we don't really know if he had sex with them, but it doesn't really matter. The film isn't gonna suddenly stop and go off following the prostitutes to see what happens to them, because the film is really about the trauma of entering this next stage of life. Yes, the it is passed on, but when Hugh passes it on to Jay, he doesn't suddenly stop seeing it. He still sees it, and in a roundabout way, it is still coming after him.
I can still see it. It's not done with me either, okay?
So there's no getting rid of it, just like there's no getting rid of death. In addition to this haunting death entity, looking to the future is daunting because of the cognitive dissonance these teens feel as a result of not knowing what to do or where to go. Jay states that it's not really about the destination, but rather it's the freedom she's after.
I had this image of myself holding hands with a really cute guy, and the trees started to change colors. It's never about going anywhere, really. It's having some sort of freedom, I guess. Now that we're old enough. Where the hell do we go?
In her monologue, she equates freedom with going on dates, so we can infer that she is free now because she's able to go on dates with Hugh and such. But with freedom comes responsibility and choices. The wheelchair scene brings to mind the famous short story, The Bound Man, which tells the story of a man who's been chained up for his entire life, living this very restricted, constrained life. Then one day, he's suddenly freed. However, he has no idea what to do with his newfound freedom. It's just too much for him. So he joins a circus in order to be chained again. So the story is about how we all yearn for absolute freedom, but if it ever happens, we really have no idea how to deal with it. And this is what happens to Jay. She gets dropped off at her house, freed from her shackles, which can be the rules imposed on her by her parents and by her school. And now she has to figure out what she wants to do and who she is. Anyway, so the future is daunting because death and uncertainty is on the horizon. So what does she do? She revisits the past. First, she goes to a playground near her house where she might have played as a child. She goes to look for Hugh, her past lover. She reminisces with Paul about their first kiss, and they even go to the location of that first kiss, where the finale of the film takes place. So there's a conscious effort to return to the past, to a more quote-unquote innocent time. So they go to the pool, and this time the it takes the form of Jay's father. I admit I had no idea it was Jay's father until I saw other people's analyses. Well, here he is right there. And this sort of explains why Jay didn't want to tell Kelly what she sees.
Jay, what do you see? I don't want to tell you.
We see that Jay's mother may have a bit of a problem with alcohol, and combined with Jay's comment, it's just that Jay's father either died or abandoned his family in some horrible way. So what does this have to do with sex and death? Well, there's a lot of speculation as to what there is in common between the different forms the it takes, but I think the answer is startlingly simple. It takes all forms to remind us of the universality of death. Everybody dies, young and old, male and female. And what better way to remind you that you're going to age and die than having the it take the form of a parent who shares roughly half of your DNA, only aged forward a few decades. Some people aspire to be like their parents, and for some, becoming their parents is their greatest fear. Either way, Jay is basically staring her future right in the face. So she has this bloody climactic battle with the creature, as typical of movies, then it suddenly cuts to her having sex with Paul and walking down the street. So what, does love conquer all? No, definitely not, thank God. That's probably the creature following them right there. And if it isn't that particular person, death is still following them because death is relentless. Plus, they aren't even in love. Hall's got this misguided schoolboy crush, and Jay has sex with him through this mixture of pity and nostalgia. So, what did their sex accomplish? Well, in a sense, nothing. But it is something that helps them cope with the eventuality of death. Sex, while reminding us of our mortality, also makes us forget about it because, orgasms. Which is why I think the it is passed on. It's still coming for you, but you feel as if there's a buffer. Some form of connection to others, no matter how meaningless and misguided, is one way to not feel utterly alone in facing the inevitability that is death. And perhaps the other way is art, which might be why Yara is always reading passages from her Shell e-reader thingy. Side note, in other horror movies where teenagers have sex, it's almost always in the context of them being a couple, or at least some form of courtship is shown to the audience. But in It Follows, we have almost no idea why people are having sex, and it's all very ambiguous, which I kind of appreciate because, well, I'm 22, but when I look at teens and other peers around me having sex, it tends to be very sporadic and ambiguous. Seriously, half of the people don't even look like they're attracted to each other, so I think the film portrays pretty accurately sex as one of the ways to cope with our postmodern world, and even just a general shift from dating and relationships to one-night stands and Tinder and all that crap. Anyway, so the creature is still following them, but they're holding hands and they don't seem too concerned. They're looking forwards instead of back, because they've found some form of courage in each other. This will definitely be temporary. As Yara says, there's no way to escape from the eventual death, and worse, the persistent knowledge of eventual death.
When there's torture, there's pain and wounds, physical agony, and all this distracts the mind from mental suffering so that one is tormented by the wounds until the moment of death.
The wounds, or sex in the context of this movie, are just distractions.